Hi, everyone. Good day and a warm welcome to the third session of Lloyd's Academy Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa Educational Program for 2024. My name is Shai from the Market Development Team for Lloyd's Asia, our platform in Singapore. We have a very exciting topic today about the introduction to product recall and liability, where two of our expert speakers from Beasley and Uline will share their knowledge and expertise. It's my pleasure to introduce Jay Pak, who will be covering product recall, and Susan Chu on product liability, presenting today. Susan Chu is the head of liability in Uline Asia. She joined the organization in 2008 as a specialist liability underwriter. Susan is responsible for the liability portfolio, which includes general liability, products liability, employer's liability, clinical trial insurance, and pharmaceutical and biotechnology composite insurance solutions, including medical malpractice liability. Prior to joining Newline, Susan worked with Allianz Group for 10 years, specializing in liability underwriting and clinical trial insurance. On the other hand, JPAC is currently responsible for the product recall book of business for Beasley in Asia Pacific. Jay graduated with a degree in risk management and insurance in 2016 from St. John's University in New York City. Shortly after graduating, she joined Chubb as a graduate associate in the product recall team, and then in 2020 moved to Beasley to help launch the product recall offering in the US. In 2022, Jay relocated to Singapore to introduce Beasley's product recall offering in the Asia Pacific region. All right, some reminders before we begin. Please feel free to ask any questions that you may have all throughout the session at the comment box located at the right corner of your screen, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. This session will also be recorded and uploaded online and will be shared upon request. An important note, to receive your certificate of attendance and claim for CPD hours, please remain until the end of the presentation and complete the feedback form. And lastly, for me, the views and opinions expressed in this webinar are those of our speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Lloyd's. The information provided is for general information purposes only and should not be construed as professional advice. All right, without further ado, I'm excited to hand over the time to Susan to begin her presentation on products liability. Thank you. Susan?
Thank you, Cheryl. Um, Thanks for the opportunity today to do the presentation jointly. This you may find it quite unusual that this is a joint presentation between Newline and Beasley, but this is our way of demonstrating to you that on the platform on Lloyd's Asia, the different service companies, sometimes we compete, sometimes we work together, and where there are suitable solutions, such as one that Newline does, which is product liability, and then in respect of Beasley, they do standalone recall. This is where we can very often come together and offer a combined solution to the prospective client. So without further ado, let me get cracking with products liability. So do bear with me. I'll give a quick introduction about who Newline is about. I will share some claims examples on products liability, talk you through the basics of product liability insurance, what are the coverages about, and then highlight some of Newline's offering in this aspect. So Newline, we're obviously a Lloyd's of London syndicate, head office in London. We have set up the Singapore office since 2007, and in terms of the class of line of business that we have been operating in has essentially been surrounding specialty casualty that includes financial lines and general liability, as well as over the course of the years, we have expanded our offering to be including marine cargo and species, affinity and extended warranty business. In terms of our financial strength, for the full year of 2023, return premium volume of 450,000. We have always pride ourselves as delivering very profitable business and delivering combined ratio of less than 100% year on year. This also reflects the nature of the long tail nature of the casualty business. We need to be around for the long term, simply because some of the claims in respect of liability comes up only much, much later. And in terms of the term that a particular claim can drag on, it's often also very, very long. So let me just share a few of the examples that you may or may not be familiar in respect of products liability. Closer to home in Singapore, you may have seen the claim in 2018 regarding the restaurant actually serving bento sets which have been contaminated, and people were hospitalized from consuming the food product. So one particular patient actually died of sepsis and then multiple organ failure. In fact, there were some statistics that were produced by the Singapore Food Agency that food poisoning remains an area of concern, and where product liability is concerned, I mean, we are looking at 50 of such incidents per year in Singapore alone. So this will be something that's closer to home in terms of a product liability claim. A couple of years ago, you may be sort of familiar, or you may recall as well, in China, there was a tainted milk incident whereby milk powder, which were meant for babies, were contaminated with melamine. So that particular incident in 2008 killed 6 infants and caused some 300,000 babies to be sick. So there was some compensation in the published report saying that around 29,000 were being paid to each family whose child has died, and then some smaller compensation that were made available to the other families whose child developed serious illness. This is more recent in Indonesia, involving a pharmaceutical company whereby Alfie Pharma actually was found to be manufacturing cough syrups that contain toxic substances. Again, the consequences were severe. I mean, these were essentially consumed by young children who were very susceptible. And as a result, there were serious kidney injury that were linked to the contaminated products. Further away from home, I mean, the earlier examples were very much in Asia, but where product liability is concerned, I think most of the underwriters would be sharing with you our reservations remains in the USA and Canada, because it is very often that you see large losses coming from these very litigious territories. So in USA, for example, this was in probably 2004, whereby the painkiller manufactured by Merck, after being 4 years in the market, they were actually found to cause more rampant heart attacks or strokes in patients. And as a result, there were allegations on the product itself. There were claims being paid. Average paid out was 375,000. But as a result of that as well, there was massive recall of the product from the market, which I think Jay will probably touch on a little bit later. This is more recent. You may have seen it as well. Johnson & Johnson, they reached a 700 million settlement in the US, over 40 over states, over the talc powder, which has been contaminated with asbestos, which is cancer causing. So again, these are very, it happens not every day, but it happens often enough, and you have seen it in the headlines. But what I wanted to highlight here is where USA is concerned, you can see that the kind of compensation and the loss quantum that we are contending with is much, much higher than everywhere else in the world. So let's just go back to what is products liability and what does it actually cover? So product liability, it's a specialty class on its own. It is very often actually bundled with a comprehensive general liability. So what you would typically see is the insurers will be offering public and product liability in the English context, or in the American context, we will be calling it a CGL, comprehensive general liability, including product and completed operation. So that essentially encapsulates public liability and product liability exposure, but very often you can also buy product liability on a standalone basis. What are we covering under product liability? The coverage is straightforward. I mean, essentially, we are talking about compensation to be made available as a result of a damage to third-party property or third-party bodily injury, which is caused directly by the insured products. Other than the direct bodily injury or property damage, we also intended to cover consequential loss flowing from that injury or that property damage. One very important aspect is, of course, we cover the cost of hospitalization, the related medical treatment to the injured party. But very often, I think the value in the product liability insurance is actually a defense costs and expenses that the insurance company will be rendering to the insured. Not forgetting whether the product is indeed defective or not, or whether the allegations are in fact accurate or not. The insured ultimately has the duty then to defend themselves in the event of an allegation. So some of the causes of action of a claim under product liability, one obvious area would be, of course, the design. The design of the product fundamentally has been defective, which is why it causes or it's a danger to the user in consuming or using the product. There could also be the manufacturing defect. That means the design of the product itself is perfectly acceptable, it's safe. However, in the manufacturing process, something has gone wrong. The food product has been contaminated. As a result, then there's a manufacturing defect. These are the obvious causes of actions, but what we wanted to highlight is obviously with any product, it comes with a consumer handbook as well, you know, the user handbook teaching you how to use the product safely. So there could also be allegations in respect of the failure to warn. Maybe because your user manual or label wasn't clear in your instruction, and as a result, the user got injured. This can also be a cause of action. Or in terms of incorrect labeling, that would be in terms of your ingredients, for example, you have omitted to mention that the product maybe contain nuts, which could cause allergy. So these are possibly cause of actions in respect of a product's liability. So after going through the course of action, then we are asking ourselves, who are the prospective buyers of product liability insurance, and who is actually at risk? So essentially, we covered the product design. So the product designer themselves, for sure, would be one on the hook. The manufacturer who produce the product itself, obviously, would be one as well. But very often we have neglected is the other parties that is in the supply chain. So it will be people such as the distributors, the suppliers, the retailers. These are the guys in the distribution chain who made the product available to the market. You may argue that they are not directly the one manufacturing nor designing the product, the finished product, but they are ultimately making the products available to the end consumers. So they likewise could be the consumer could go after them in the event that they are being injured by the products that they distribute. So maybe just to highlight to you what are not covered in the standalone product liability, obviously the obvious employer's liability, contractual liability. What you will more often than not find is the damage to the product itself in terms of the repair and replacement that is not covered. We are obviously not there to be guaranteeing the performance or the product efficacy under a product liability. That is very much a business risk, and the product's recall and guarantee as well, and the likes of the infringement of patents, that is also not the scope of the typical product liability insurance. So generally for product liability, there are two policy trigger you would be able to see from the market. One will be the claims made basis versus the occurrence form wording. Essentially, claims made wording suggests that the policy will respond to any claim which is made during the policy period. So that is the short description of that. The claim has to be made during the policy period, regardless when the injury may have occurred. So you can have an injury that happened a year or 2 years later, and after some investigation, the third party only realized, oh, it was due to me consuming this product that causes this injury, and then the claim was only made 2 years later. So the current policy year, then when the claim has been formally made, will be the one responding. In contrast, the occurrence form wording will respond to any claim which occurred during the period of insurance. So that would actually suggest that even though the policy may have expired, a particular policy may have expired, but if a loss has occurred during the policy period and then the claim was not made until 1 year later, then the occurrence form wording a year ago would have to pick up that particular claim because it is based on when the claim or the loss actually occurred. So there are some pros and cons, which I think we can probably discuss a little bit further. But I'm not going to cover that now. In terms of trends, I think what I want to highlight is, of course, product liability. We are seeing that in correlated to the country's stage of development. USA, Canada, obviously, it's very, very litigious. That's just how the legal environment has been. So where there is USA exposure, definitely the product liability premium has to commensurate for the kind of exposure in the USA. We are seeing that the trending of product liability grow, obviously, with the level of public awareness, the availability of social media. Everything is now in the public. So people are definitely much more aware of their rights and responsibility. Of course, the legislation also plays a big part, and we do see that the legislators in Asia actually are putting in place acts and laws for better consumer protection. That is one, and what we are seeing in terms of the trending is, of course, contractually, in terms of the buyers in Europe as well as in US, they are now imposing stricter requirements on the suppliers in Asia, for example, in procuring product liability insurance for better protection. Then, of course, the plaintiff lawyers, they will always seek creative ways to hold the responsible party liable in such scenarios. Okay, in terms of new lines offering, I'm just going to briefly touch on it. Generally, we have two parts to our offering. One will be pharmaceuticals and life sciences focus, and it will be across biotech, medicine, pharmaceuticals, generic pharmaceuticals, medical devices manufacturers. And then the other segment of our specialty lies in the heavier automotive manufacturers. We do the finished cars, special vehicles. We do the railway products, the rolling stocks as well, heavy equipment. But we do the plain vanilla food and drinks, as well as the textile products, garments, safety equipment, and PPEs. So generally, our offering, other than a standard products liability, we have the ability to at least bundle public liability solution, products liability solution, together with if there is any manufacturing E&O exposure concern. So we have quite a well-rounded offering across the general liability solution space, except for the recall. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Jay, who's going to talk more about their recall offering and see whether there will be opportunities whereby we could actually bundle solution on a combined basis on general liability and products recall. So this is the team that we have. Three of us, Siu Hong, Caden, we are based in Singapore, looking after Asia, and then Shirley and Emily will be in China, looking after our Chinese clients. And that is all for today, actually, from products liability. Shai?
I think I will be taking over. Thank you for the presentation, Susan. 1 second while I share my screen. Okie doke. Hope you guys can all see this. So thanks everyone for joining today's session. I'm going to be going over product recall, and here at Beasley, we actually call it product manufacturing risk and response. And we kind of have it named that way just because we kind of did like a rebranding of our product, and we wanted to make our offering more relatable to all manufacturers, not just end product manufacturers. And I hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll get a better understanding of that. So today I'm going to be going over just briefly team introduction, what exactly is product recall, go over some regional recall events, and then afterwards go into product recall insurance. I'll talk a little bit about Beasley's offering and then end with the life cycle of a claim. So just before we start, typically I would do this in person, but you guys can shake your heads yes or no by yourselves. But if you guys have any clients in the manufacturing or product space, whoops, yes or no. Have you guys ever placed a product liability policy? Yes or no. Or have you ever placed a standalone product recall policy? Yes or no. So I would say if you've answered yes to any of these questions, then you should definitely be exploring product recall. And this is just a overview of the global product recall underwriting team. We have a handful of us in the US, 2 of us in Canada, and then we have 2 local underwriters here in Singapore. Yeah. And a little bit about myself, but Shira already gave us an introduction, so no need to read this one. Okay, so now I'm getting into kind of the more interesting stuff. So what exactly is product recall? If you guys have ever seen or heard of a product recall, yes or no, essentially product recall can really refer to a couple different things. I'm not going to really read the definitions that I have listed on the slide, but you can either refer to a product recall, a stock recovery, or a market withdrawal. And two things that will really help you differentiate and understand what it might be is one, has a product left insured's premises, care, custody, and control? And two, is there a violation of law or local regulation? So if your answer is yes, yes, or yes, no, or no, yes, it'll help you determine, is it a product recall, is it a stock recovery, or is it a market withdrawal? So for product recall, it's usually going to be both yeses. The product has left the insured's premises, care, custody, and control, and it's going to violate local law regulation. For stock recovery, it hasn't left the insured's care, custody, and control, but there is a potential for it to violate local law regulation. And market withdrawal, it isn't going to really violate the law regulation, but it has potentially left the insured's care, custody, and control. And I have some test questions, hopefully, to help clarify these three. Let's see. So I have three examples. Evian water is contaminated with E. coli, and it's in the shelves of 7-Eleven. Are you guys thinking this is a product recall, a stock recovery, or a market withdrawal? You can think about the answer yourself. Okay. The second example is a Pringles chip. There's a Pringles chip where the logo of the color is not 100% in line with the brand's identity. Would you consider this a product recall, a stock recovery, or a market withdrawal? And then the last example I'm going to give, it's a defective children's toy. It's been packed, boxed up, and ready to be loaded onto a shipping truck, but it's still within the insurance premises. Would you consider this a product recall, a stock recovery, or a market withdrawal? I'll let you guys think about the answers yourself, and then I will unveil them. Hopefully it works. Yeah, so the first one is a product recall. The second example that I've outlined, that's actually a market withdrawal because there isn't really a violation of law regulation, but more so it's a quality issue. They don't want to have products out there that aren't in line with the brand's identity. And the third one, that's a stock recovery, and that's because the product is still with the insured's premises. Oops. So now that you guys kind of know the terminology behind what is a recall, I want to go over what are the events that can lead to recall. So I know it's a huge giant web here, but hopefully I can go over it without it being too complicated. So we'll start at adulteration. So things that can cause a recall, it can be an adulteration. That can be something that's unintentionally contaminating your product. So they could be with mold, chemical contamination, allergens, filth, foreign materials, biological contaminations, or even a pathogen. Another cause of a recall could also be mislabeling. Does your product have ingredients mislabeled? Are the benefits not labeled correctly? Are the risks not there properly? Or is the labeling not in compliance with local law? Another cause of a recall, it could be, is it a government recall or government advisory? So there is a difference between the two. Government recall, typically it is going to name your product. Oh, sorry. Sorry. So typically with the government recall, it is going to name your specific product, whereas a government advisory, it's more of a general notice given to the public, telling you to not consume a type of product. And within these segments, it can be either an involuntary recall or a voluntary recall. And typically I ask people, like, do you think most recalls are involuntary or voluntary? And surprisingly, a lot of people always think that most recalls are involuntary, but I would say majority of the recalls that happen are voluntary. And another cause of loss, there's also product tampering. So the difference between adulteration and product tampering is the malicious intent. So typically with adulteration, it's more negligence, whereas with product tampering, there's intentional malicious intent behind it. Another cause of a recall is also extortion. And typically you will see extortion related more so to consumable products as opposed to non-food. And that's typically because you don't really see extortion happening with non-food products. And the last bubble I'm going to go over is going to be defect. So if there's a defect with their product, such as with the function, if it's hazardous, dangerous, if there's an issue with the quality, if there's an issue with the utility, failure to perform, or loss of use, usually if it's within that realm, it can cause a recall to happen. And hopefully now that you guys kind of know what a recall is and what can cause it, I wanted to kind of segue into some regional recall events just so you have a better understanding of these issues. So in 2015, Takata, they had one of the largest auto recalls in US history. Over 100 million units were recalled across 12 automakers, and that was because they had a defective airbag inflator. So typically when you're in a car accident, you're thinking, oh, the airbag will go off and it'll prevent some kind of damage from happening. But what was happening with the Takata airbags is that once the inflators were going off, people were actually dying from impact because of shrapnel coming into their bodies. So that was definitely a big issue for the auto industry. And I think the video is going to play, but I'm going to skip it for time. Okay, and then here's some regional recall events for Singapore. Hetero Labs in 2019, they recalled blood pressure medicine because impurity levels were above acceptable levels. Ego Foods 2023, they had to recall their honey dates because of allergens being not declared in the food packaging. 2024 and 2023, IKEA, they had issues with their USB chargers and their mirrors. Both were causing bodily injury. In Taiwan, we had Kobayashi Pharmaceuticals in 2024. They had issues with their red yeast rice products. It affected, I think, 121 food products. 5 people died, and there were hundreds that were hospitalized due to the presence of unintended ingredients. Baosin Enterprises, they had about 260 kg of food products recalled because there was a presence of a banned dye or carcinogen. In China, BYD, they recalled 53,000 EVs because there was a defective battery, which was leading to spontaneous combustion. 2024, Tesla, they recalled 87,000 EVs because rear camera ICC had software issues. San Quan Food, 2019, they had issues with pork dumplings containing African swine fever. And in Korea, we had Hwaseong Cosmetic. They had about 13 brands, 13 beauty products across 9 brands recalled because they have excess levels of antimony, and I believe that is lead. Samsung, this might be something that you guys are aware of. In 2016, they had the issues with the faulty phone batteries combusting. And we had Daiso in 2023. They had to recall about 53,000 pairs of plastic slippers because of toxic chemical leaching. And also Hyundai and Kia, they had to recall about 170,000 EVs because of software problems in their charging systems. So now that you kind of have some real life events fresh in your mind, I kind of want to segue into what's a way to risk transfer some of these costs that can be incurred from these events. And how do you do that? It's with product recall insurance. So essentially, product recall insurance is going to reimburse your insured for any of the financial loss that they incur to pull the product out of the stream of commerce, as well as the cost to put it back. And typically, coverage also extends to protect our brand, the reputation, as well as costs to mitigate the loss as well. And there is also a financial loss it's also going to cover financial loss a third party has due to a recall. So essentially, it's a first party reimbursement policy. We're only going to be paying claims the first party. We're not making any third party payments. And third parties cannot make a claim against the policy. It's claims made and a short tail, so typically the insured incident will occur and be discovered and reported during the policy year. And usually, claims are settled within like 1 to 3 years. And coverage is severity. Um, Most clients aren't assuming that they'll have a recall every quarter. This is something that they're hoping happens very infrequently, but when it does happen, it is catastrophic in nature. And again, this provides balance sheet protection because we're going to be reimbursing the insured for any financial loss that they have due to an incident. So, a quick recap is product recall insurance severity or occurrence based. Um, it is severity based. And is product recall insurance first or third party coverage? So, it is first party, as I said, but there are third party elements. And Um, I kind of wanted to include this slide because typically, if you're a manufacturer or if you're dealing with any products, you're kind of recommended to have this trio of coverage to have um, to be fully covered. So, product recall, product liability, and manufacturer's E&O. And I wanted to kind of highlight the differences between them. So, again, recall is first party coverage and it covers financial loss from a recall. Um, Essentially, we don't really care about the actual BI or PD. We only care about the financial loss and like the reputational harm that the insured and their customers and clients incur due to an incident. And lastly, manufacturer's E&O is a third-party coverage, but it covers breach of contract and it does not need BI or PD. So, oops, is liability for bodily injury or property damage covered by product recall insurance? The answer is no. So what's Beasley's take on this coverage? So we have a two-pronged solution. The first one that you'll see on the left is the manufacturing risk insurance, and the second one is going to be the response services. So we're going to be providing an insurance coverage which is broad enough to cover all the costs when a recall arises, regardless of when it happens and where it happens with the supply chain. And the second one is the response services, which basically it allows the insured to have access to expertise to mitigate the crisis and get their business up and running sooner. Um, and a little bit about what we can do. It's locally written in Singapore. We have a claims manager based in Singapore. We can do worldwide capacity up to 5 million, and we can do contract specific, product specific, or coverage for full company. And a little bit before I go into appetite, I do want to point out for product recall, typically we have two different policy forms, and that's because we want to tailor the coverage for the different industries. So we have consumer goods and component parts, which is typically referred to non-food, and we also have consumable products. So component parts, consumer goods, that's any finished product you can grab off the shelf of a retail store that's not food related, or any component part that can be further incorporated into another into a finished product. While consumable product is anything topical or ingestible for human use or consumption. Um, and in terms of our appetite, I would say we probably have the broadest appetite in the market. We can do pretty much any class of business from automotive critical to non-critical, aviation, aerospace, electronic component parts, batteries, industrial manufacturing, medical devices, appliances, finished goods. We just don't have an appetite for bulk chemicals. And in the consumable space, again, we have quite a broad appetite. We can do pretty much everything: food and beverage, cosmetics, toiletries, life science products. We just don't like bulk products like commodities, as well as food chemicals such as flavorings, preservatives, additives, colorings, tobacco, flavors and colorings, and we also don't do tobacco or vape liquids. So I had a question: what's one class of business we don't consider? And I always tell people it should be bulk chemicals. That's what you should say all the time. I'm trying to be mindful of time, so I might quickly go over the policy triggers, but one thing I wanted you guys to understand is that we have design error, supply chain error, and manufacturing error as a trigger for our non-food form, but they all tie back into, is there a defect or mislabeling? So as long as there's a defect, which is a flaw, fault, imperfection, deficiency, inadequacy, failure to perform, loss of use, hazard, or abnormality that impairs the quality, function, or utility, or if there's a mislabeling, it's going to trigger our policy. So it can happen at any point in the product's life cycle, but as long as there's a defect or mislabeling, it's going to trigger our non-food form. And then I want to go into the policy trigger for consumable products. Again, same idea. The claim can happen at any point in the product's life cycle, but there just needs to be an adulteration or a packaging defect. And adulteration, again, it's any biological or chemical contamination, poisonous or deleterious substance, a pathogen, an allergen, filth, or material or mold that can cause BIRPD or a packaging defect. So it can be an adulteration or packaging defect that happens at any point in the product's life cycle, and it will trigger our policy. And now that I've quickly kind of gone into the policy triggers, I also wanted to go into how we do losses here at Beasley. So our policy is laid out a bit differently from other carriers. We have, instead of explicitly defining what's covered or what's not covered, we kind of have more broad general loss buckets. And that's kind of because we always want to find more ways to provide coverage as opposed to taking it away. So we have operating costs. That's essentially all of the costs the insured might have to pull the product out of the stream of commerce and to put it back. So it includes redesigning, reinstalling, and restoring an impacted product. We have business loss, which is income loss and extra expense that they might have, as well as reputational damages. So that's any advertising, marketing, or PR costs to bring them back to a pre-loss sales projection. And then third-party damages, it's essentially third-party operating costs, third-party business loss, or third-party reputational damages that we also cover within the policy. And we also provide coverage for response services. So essentially, uh, they'll also have services related to advisory services, investigation, forensic accounting, legal, and reputational management included as a covered loss. And these are the loss buckets for consumable products. You can see it's pretty much the same or similar to our component parts consumer goods form, but the main difference is that within operating costs, we changed redesign to show reformulate. So we will reformulate. We will cover the cost to reformulate an impacted product, and we've also added extortion monies because typically we do see extortion events happening on the consumable side. And I will have to skip over this. And I kind of wanted to go over some claims examples over some things that we have paid for. So the first example, we had an insured who was manufacturing nutrition bars for their customer, and they discovered listeria in the production line, requiring the whole facility to be shut down. So we ended up reimbursing the insured about $275,000 for the affected inventory, additional labor, overhead, as well as the destruction costs. And I also wanted to go to the bottom right. So that's the one with the two glasses. So we also had an insured. They were a co-packer contracted with an overseas firm to manufacture glass bottles for glass bottles for their beverages. But when the bottles were received, it was determined that there was a laceration risk with the tip of the glass. So we ended up assisting the insured in reaching like a monetary settlement with the glass manufacturer, and they were reimbursed for about $792 in costs, and that's from the cost of the product, the freight, the drayage, all that. And some of the key exclusions I wanted to go over, and I'm not going to go over into everything, but I did want to mention that on the right-hand side, you'll see exclusions from other markets and rest of the market. So these are exclusions that we don't include here at Beasley, and that's typically because we kind of rebranded we took a fresh look at our form, and we saw that some of these exclusions are kind of outdated. So that's why we don't have the change in government regulation. We don't have the failure to adhere to prescribed procedures. We actually provide coverage for design and redesign expenses, and we don't have an exclusion for GMOs, hormones, or TSE. And I am going to skip over this. And what we need to quote, I will skip over this as well. And sorry, and that is going to be it for me.
Thank you very much, Jay and Susan, of course, for a very insightful topic. And we really appreciate all the examples that you have provided. And so now we have some very interesting questions here on the chat box. So we're still encouraging people to send in their questions. So for the first question, we have Jay and Susan. Feel free to let us know your thoughts. For Susan, in products liability, if the seeding company is dragged into legal proceedings, New Line will bear the defense costs. However, if it's later found that the insured conducted gross negligence, will the claim still be settled? And from when would this be applicable? Starting from the beginning of the legal proceedings?
So I think there are two parts to the question. I mean, the first part suggested that this is probably a reinsurance contract and then the seeding company involved. I'm not sure how material that is. So let me just address the second part. I mean, if in the end, so ultimately, I was saying earlier, the products liability, it's meant to be providing the defense cost cover, and that is very important aspect of the uh, buying the products liability in the first place. So that is before determining whether there was liability on the part of the insured. But having established that there is actually gross negligence on the insured's part, and if that amounts to a criminal offense, then it will be against the public policy for the products liability to be even defending the insured in the first place. So, I mean, subject to at which point in time the criminal offense was being determined, I guess that's where we have to state that the policy would not be defending further the insured, and then potentially we reserve the right to claw back any expenses that we may have paid before.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question would be, how do you view EV risk? And is there a gray area between motor liability and product liability in EV space?
Um, Jay, I think I take that one. It's more product liability. I don't think the distinction is actually between, I don't see sort of a big distinction between EV and the traditional vehicles. So the question isn't so relevant whether it's EV or traditional vehicles. But ultimately, yes, there is a relationship between traditional motor liability insurance versus products liability, except that with regard to product liability, ultimately, the plaintiff, they have to prove that there is actual defect on the part of the product and the injury or whatsoever accident was caused by the defective product. So where motor liability is concerned, there is, of course, a lot of human aspect. The human error comes into play. So I don't think the gray area is so much between EV and or traditional vehicles, but it's more, yeah, where motor liability is concerned, that it's the first policy to be responding to a motor incident. However, subject to investigation, and if subsequently it can be proven that there is certain defect that lies in the motor or the vehicle itself, then the plaintiff may have a case against our insured of the motor vehicles.
Thank you, Susan. Jay?
Yeah, and I think my main comment on that would be kind of like EV versus traditional cars would be the risks that we're seeing related to these products. And I would say we have seen trends in more cars becoming more EV. So I think because there's been a rush in people trying to incorporate this technology, we've been seeing more losses in this in this industry. So I would actually say I think lately we've seen more losses in automotive non-critical because it's EV related as opposed to automotive critical. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jay and Susan. I'm moving forward to the next one. Under a claims made PR policy, if claim occurs on the last day of the policy, is there a reporting period provided, or does claim fall into the next policy period?
Yeah, so typically under a policy period, you do have about 45 days to report the claim after the policy has ended. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Next, are you able to provide a product recall on a multi-year basis for Jay?
No. So generally, product recall is issued on an annual basis, and at most carriers will do maybe 18 months, but typically it's a 1-year policy. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we have more questions here. How does the process of subrogation work in the context of product recall insurance? And what role does the insurer play in recovering costs from third-party suppliers?
I think I'm trying to think of an example. So we had an insured um that glass beverage, that glass bottle manufacturer example that I mentioned at the end. So essentially, we found out that there was a contract in place between our insurer, Ed, are insured, and their supplier, and there were certain standards that the supplier was supposed to provide products to, and when it found it wasn't met, and it was because of their product that caused a recall. We had I believe it was a discussion between our claims team and the supplier of the products, and then they came to an agreement with how much they were willing to uh, I guess, subrogate for the cost. But I would say I am not directly uh, included in those conversations. I am kind of asked in terms of the policy wording, but typically that is all handled by the claims team that we have.
Thank you, Jay. And another question for Jay, to what extent is third party covered under product recall whilst excluding TPPD and TBBI? And second question to follow up on that, do you extend cover for third party distributors?
So I believe on the slides, I mentioned that on our policy wording, we also have a coverage for third-party damages. So under third-party damages, we'll cover the cost for the third party to pull the product out of the stream of commerce and also to put it back. So that's like repair, replace, refund, redistribute, reinstall, like whatever financial loss that they have is covered, as well as the third party's business loss. If the third party has loss of income because they had to pull the product, that's also covered as well. Or even if the third party has like if they have any um, I'm having a blank on the word, but if the third party also has to issue discounts, coupons, or any kind of promotional activity to get themselves back to a pre-loss incident, that's also covered under the policy as well. And the question about extending cover for third-party distributors. So again, this is a first-party reimbursement policy. We don't cover third party. We are going to make payments to the first party, and typically they will make payments to their customers, depending on what they see fit, but we don't provide coverage we don't insure the third party. They'd have to get their own policy.
Okay, thank you. And I guess for both Jay and Susan, the next question is, what is your stance on PFAS exclusion? And by taking PFAS as an example, how do you think product liability and products recall underwriters keep up with such emerging risks, generally speaking? Susan, would you like to go first?
Okay. Generally, we acknowledge that PFAS as a chemical is very, very widely used in the manufacturing process. I mean, it's across all industries. So with the associated health hazard involved, our stance has been this is going to be a systemic risk and it affects anyone and everyone. So our stance so far has been that we have to try to impose an exclusion simply because of the widely use nature of such chemicals. However, from an underwriting perspective, we are willing to hear from the insured. how have they been mitigating the exposure? How have they been managing the risk management so that we have an understanding and we can underwrite around it to provide a certain right back cover or extension.
Thank you.
Um, and and sorry,
Yes.
I was gonna say for recall, it is a claims made and reported uh policy form. So there needs to be like in terms of PFAS, we're assuming it's like a non-food product. So there needs to be defect that happens within the policy year. So um I would say it's something that we're mindful of, but I don't believe it would be too applicable to how our policy form works. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. And lastly, we have a question here. Are you going to provide silent recall coverage in the Singapore market?
And I don't know how to
Okay.
answer that because I don't know what silent recall coverage is. I mean, if you know Susan or Shire or
Yeah,
Aaron.
I think maybe that is directed at products liability because you do standalone recall, right? So it will never be silent. I am guessing maybe that is directed at product liability. I don't think any underwriter in their right mind would be giving a silent products recall coverage. What we have to recognize that it is a very specialized offering on its own in its own right, and it does need to be underwritten properly. So yeah, that would be a no, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Jay and Susan. I think just lastly for myself, we have such interesting questions here and such good examples from here. And I just want to ask, to summarize everything, what would be your main key takeaway for the session for our attendees to bring? Would you like to begin, Jay?
Yeah, I hopefully it wasn't too rushed. I was trying to get through everything, but for me, I think the main point I want people to understand is if you're dealing with a client that um does products or has any semblance to products, they should be considering having product legal coverage because it is going to be the first line of defense and it's going to be protecting the insurance balance sheet. And I would say um it is uh yeah, I think if you're doing products, you need to get product recall. I think hopefully people keep getting interested about the coverage and they can learn more about it and eventually start buying coverage. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Susan?
For me, not dissimilar. My observation has been that this is a line of business that has been very, very under tapped. The awareness in Asia remains very, very low. Probably from historical reasons, the loss environment has been good. But what we should not ignore is our products can be sold and exported anywhere. So the client's exposure is ever shifting, ever changing. Going to Europe, going to US, it presents a totally different exposure altogether. So for us as industry practitioners, I would like to see ourselves, more actively engaging with our prospective insured and then sharing with them what kind of protection that they should be getting for themselves.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan and Jay. And with that, we have come to the end of the presentation. I would like to once again thank you, Jay and Susan, for the very insightful session and for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. And to everybody who joined, thank you as well. Please do remain at the end as I will be sharing my screen shortly for the QR code to send in your feedback and get your certificate of attendance afterward for the CPD hours. Right. Thank you so much again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session next week on Introduction to Fine Art on the 23rd, Tuesday, and D&O Insurance for Distressed Companies on the 25th, Thursday, same time, 3 p.m. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.